Oh, good evening, good evening. What a difference it makes when you run the lawnmower around. What is it today? 22nd of April 2020. Yeah, we've had a few days rain. That was why I ran the lawnmower around today, because the lawn had just gone crazy. You know, a couple of days of rain and it suddenly just goes woof, as it were. Lots to do, lots to do. I've sort of half promised to do a third discussion about St. George. Now, in this part of the world, they do celebrate St. George because he is one of the great saints of the church, one of the 14 helpers. He was a man of very great faith. The way that it would be celebrated here is the same as it would be celebrated for any saint, any of the canonised saints that the church says, you know, they should be celebrated, should be feasted, as it were, or feted. In England, that changed with, well, I'll say the Reformation. It was sort of tied up with the Reformation. It wasn't entirely at the same time. But whereas before Henry VIII, the church in England celebrated all of the saints, you know, St. Joseph on the 19th of March, or St. Anselm on the, what did we decide that was, the 21st of April. All of the saints were celebrated, and churches would ring bells and hold masses, and people would, I guess they would say their rosaries and things like that. But in England after the Reformation, and I'm sticking my neck out and someone's going to correct me, I think it was James it was either James or Edward VI or somebody decided that the church in England would stop having all of those masses for all of those different saints, except for St. George. The Church of England normally flies the flag of St. George, you know, the red cross on the white background, every day, because it's the Church of England. It's not the Church of the United Kingdom, it's not the Church of Scotland, Ireland, Wales and all that sort of thing. So they would normally fly it. Now, I did a little bit of a straw poll using some incredibly non-scientific methods. And I asked a question about how do people celebrate St. George's Day, and I got answers. I can't say I was disappointed, because they were pretty much the answers that I expected. People said they would fly the flag of St. George, hang it out of an upstairs window, or possibly they would run it up a flagpole if they've got a flagpole. And I asked supplementary questions. I asked why. And that was when I didn't get any answers. I say I didn't get any, I got some. Well, it's what you do. It's to show national unity. It's to show that we're proud to be English. Nobody said because George was a great saint. They all were responses that sort of fit into the into the sort of span of gentle patriotism through to rabid nationalism. We fly the flag of St George because we're proud to be English. And if you ask the next question, do you understand where St George comes from? There's an awful lot of people say, yeah, he's Greek, isn't he? Sort of, yes, sort of. I'll accept Greek, Turkish, I'll accept Middle Eastern, Near Eastern. Certainly I think everybody knows he wasn't English. So why St George? Why not one of all of those other great saints? And the nearest I got to an answer from anybody, one chap said, well, he was a fighter. I said, okay. I did ask the next question, sort of who, what, when, how, and how hard, and what fight was he in? And I got a deafening silence. Now, as to how people celebrate beyond flying a flag, the other thing that everyone that responded said was if we weren't in lockdown, they would go to the pub and drink a few pints to celebrate St George. And I guess that's probably what the British or what the English would do to celebrate winning a football match, the birth of a child, wedding anniversary. Leave the little woman at home while you go to the wedding anniversary with your mates. But that's the sort of way that people tend to celebrate. Of course, the way that I tend to celebrate things is by planting beans. I think that's a very good way of celebrating this year, so that I can eat later in the year when all the shops are empty. They're runner beans, they're haricot, or haricot, because the H is silent. But yeah, a lot of people talk about celebrations as being pub-based. Oh, that's it. That's better. We're in the recording studio now. It's much easier to concentrate and not look at beans and things. So, yes, a lot of people seem to think that the appropriate way to celebrate anything is by going to the pub, except we can't because we're in lockdown. So maybe instead they will get lots of tins of beer or lager and they'll have a barbecue in their garden, without their mates coming round, because at the moment that's not the done thing. Not one of the people that responded to me said George is a saint. He's a saint recognised by churches, so the appropriate thing to do is to go to church and say prayers and have services in his honour. Very few people look beyond the opportunity to have a knees up. Now, there is a discussion going on at the moment about how we're going to celebrate May the 8th this year. For those of you that don't know the significance of May the 8th, it's Victory in Europe Day. It's the day that was pronounced as the day that we could celebrate the end of the fighting and the war in Europe in 1945. May the 8th, Victory in Europe Day. And there's a huge number of people think that we ought to have parties and street parties and so on and so forth. And yet they do not remember the end of the Second World War. They're not old enough. But it's an excuse for a knees up. It's an excuse for people to get their DJ equipment out and play loud music and generally, singing and dancing in the street. I'm not against that. I don't oppose that at all, but I do sometimes wonder if people think a little bit beyond the headline of what the day is. And of course, my conclusion in so many subjects is that actually they don't. It's, well, Christmas, you've got to go to the pub. Easter, you've got to buy chocolate. St George's Day, we'll sink a few pints of lager. Because St George, he was a good bloke, wasn't he? Without setting down and thinking through, you know, what was it St George did? What was it that happened in Europe on the 8th of May? What was it that Easter or Christmas or August bank holiday, what are they about? Harvest Festival. What's it based in? And of course, very often we discover that the vast majority of people don't actually want to know the history. They're not bothered about it as long as we can have a knees up. And I think in many ways that's sad that people don't. And of course the same applies to other events. As a child we celebrated Guy Fawkes Night, and we did it quite vigorously with great big bonfires and fireworks and such likes. No one told me as a child that what we were celebrating was the execution of a man that we could call a terrorist, we could call him a freedom fighter, but we were celebrating the execution of a man. We were celebrating the survival of parliamentary democracy in the United Kingdom. Let's not go too deep into that. But people just don't go deeply into things. And that, I guess, is human nature. Of course, that does have an impact. If you are trying to study something like folklore, and you say to somebody, oh, I don't know, if you spill salt on the table, why do you throw a pinch of salt over your left shoulder? Why'd you do that? And people tend to say, well, that's because what you do. Or my mum told me to do that, or whatever. They're not going to go into a great long, in-depth explanation of the various things that they get up to. So there we are. Am I going to celebrate St George's Day tomorrow? Yes, in private, in the privacy of my own humble abode. Yes, I shall remember St George, and I shall remember that he isn't your mate George, he isn't your Uncle George, he isn't, oh, I don't know, George the Shade Tree Fix-It Man. It's all right, I'm not ill, that's dust and such likes. He is Saint George. He is famous for not recanting his faith. He is also famous for killing a dragon. From everything I've read about that, it would seem that there is no evidence to support that. That is a legend. It's a lovely legend. I don't mind people talking about the legend, but it's exactly that. It's a legend. For those of you that don't know, the story basically is somewhere, possibly near Lydda in what we now call Israel, there was a village that was terrorised by a dragon. And the village people, to stop the dragon from terrorising the village, they would bung the dragon a couple of sheep, and then they ran out of sheep and they started bunging the dragon a person who was elected or appointed or just pulled the short straw, I don't know. And then apparently the king's daughter, she became the person that was next to be thrown to the dragon, and she asked that some brave chap would kill the dragon. And apparently St George put on his armour, climbed on his horse. In iconography, St George is entitled to be painted on a black horse. Why? Not too sure about that one. But off he went with his lance and killed the dragon. That's a legend. Anyway, if you've watched all three of these videos about St George, well, you probably deserve a medal. Don't go to the pub tomorrow, it's closed. I don't necessarily suggest that you should swallow lots of tins of amber nectar. Have a little thought about St George and what St George actually did.